Good morning, everybody. Thank you, first of all, to Marathon Medicine for inviting me to speak here this morning. I remember watching some of the 2025 London Marathon on the television. Enjoyed it very much. I couldn't help but notice that all of the participants in the races were human beings. Initially, I thought there might be some other species in the race, but my keen biologist's eye worked out for me that those were in fact human beings dressed up as animals, and sometimes fruit. Anyway, it got me thinking. We see incredible feats of running endurance from athletes at the London Marathon. We'll see it again tomorrow, maybe the greatest of all time, we'll see. People running over 26 miles in marginally more than 2 hours. So we know that some individuals with the motivation, the genes, the opportunity can do extraordinary things. But how good are we as a species innately at running distance? In other words, if there were other species in the London Marathon, how would human beings fare? Would we be winning or would we be laggards? And so to formalize this, my talk today is going to look at human beings versus other species. Are we really built for distance running? So this is a classic comparative approach. We'll see what we're like compared to other species when it comes to movement over distance. And so to give you a heads up, the answer to the question, having explored the literature and leaned on some of my own work, in answer to the question, are we built for distance running, it's somewhat of a yeah, but no, but yeah, but no. But I'm going to finish on the positive, but yeah. So we'll finish on a high. But the point here is, really it depends on the specifics of the comparison that we're making against what species, but also under what context. So here's a depiction, the iconic depiction of the ascent of man, where we see evolution from our ancestral hominids to modern human beings, and that physical change from being a quadrupedal walker to a bipedal walker. And not just bipedal, but standing up tall and, with confidence. In a sense, depicting possible superiority. Well, is bipedal movement superior to quadrupedal movement? If you think about it, pretty much all other mammals locomote, ambulate quadrupedally on all four limbs. It's pretty much only human beings that walk upright. Does this give us advantages when we walk and run? As well as being bipedal, which may or may not provide us with advantages, there are a number of other derived traits that appear to support cursorial movement. So to give you a flavour of some of these, perhaps we'll start from the bottom and work our way up. Human feet are rather long and also rather deep. This can encompass a deep plantar arch, which provides energy storage and recovery for each step that we take. Similarly, we have rather prominent, thick, long Achilles tendons, which again provide recovery from one step to the other, which should enhance our locomotion efficiency. Human beings have rather short arms as apes go, and they swing in motion as we walk. Maybe we take that for granted, but it's not the case for our close cousins. We also have a rather well-balanced head, so that when we're walking or even running, we have fairly good vision. Our head, our skull, is kind of gimbaled acts rather like a gyroscope, and partly because of the nuchal ligament at the back of the neck, which gives us stability. And there are other features too, such as particularly thick and wide joints in key parts of the skeletal system that provide robustness against stress when we're moving. Well, these and other supposed derived characteristics may enhance our endurance ability. But really we need to test this empirically, and I think a lot of you will know that the way we get an idea, we can measure the energy expenditure that people use to move, to walk and to run, is obtained with this classical approach. We have people walking and running at different speeds controlled on a treadmill, and then we capture their respiratory gas exchange via a mask which is connected to a respiratory gas analyzer. So we measure rate of oxygen consumption by the person and also rate of carbon dioxide output. And under many situations, though not all, but in many situations, those measures are a good proxy of energy expenditure, or if you like, power production. So we can ask people to walk and run at different speeds, and we can see how much energy it costs them to do that. We can also do that with other species. Now, most other species, bar a few exceptions, won't accept a mask over their mouth. So typically what you do is expand the size of the mask so that it covers the whole body. And so we can see the equivalent approach being taken to measure the movement and running costs, the running costs of rats, mountain lion or cougar. We have geese, huskies and penguins, to name but a few species where we have a measurement of their costs to move. And this measurement of movement cost is called the net cost of transport. That's the energy expended to move a unit distance. Now, a long time ago now, colleague Craig White and I collated from the data, from the literature, all the data we could find on the net cost of transport for different mammal species, and added to it some of our own data as well. As you can imagine, bigger species expend more energy to move a unit distance because they're bigger. So what we've done is regressed the net cost of transport of all these different mammals, from shrews to elephants, against their body mass. And if you log transform the data on these two axes, and I'll touch on that again in a moment, you get a nice straight line relationship between the two. Each of the data points on this graph is a different species, except where I've highlighted there for Homo sapiens, for humans, where we have two data points, one for walking and one for running, because we're quite unusual in being a species that shows two very clear gaits when we move. I've also got there in grey Pan troglodytes, that's a chimpanzee, so our nearest cousin. And so you can see that for our body mass, we're slightly more efficient, or somewhat more efficient, than is predicted when we're walking. Our net cost of transport is a little lower than we might expect. But for running, our net cost of transport is higher. Now, they're not a long way from that line of best fit, as you can see, but bear in mind that the y-axis is log transformed. So for bigger animals such as humans, small distances on the graph mean a little bit bigger differences in magnitude. But note also that for running Homo sapiens, that's pretty much covering the data points for chimpanzees. So at running, at least, we're not more efficient than our quadrupedal cousins. On the other hand, we are when it comes to walking. Can we put this down to our bipedalism? Can we put this down to that and/or these other derived characteristics that I mentioned? Well, bluntly, no. It might be that bipedality gives us an advantage when we're walking and maybe a disadvantage when we're running, but we can't be clear of cause and effect. Here I've plotted a number of closely related species, including, again, Pan troglodytes and Homo sapiens. I've highlighted that in the middle there. And I'm showing there in the graph the residual, the difference between what we'd expect their net cost of transport to be for their size and what it actually is. And this is, for humans, it's the walking cost. So we can see for Homo sapiens there, they're a little bit lower than we would expect for their size. Pan troglodytes a little bit higher. The thing is, if you take other pairs of species that we have data for, that are often even more closely related, in fact, to each other, often the differences between those pairs of species is greater. So, for example, the top two species there, the notomies, are hopping mice. They're anatomically very similar to each other, slightly different paint jobs, but apart from that, they're very similar, but you can see quite large differences in their net cost of transport. The next two species here, the tamias, two species of chipmunks, again, anatomically very similar. Their movement characteristics are very similar. The next two species are the northern and southern flying squirrels. And again, bigger differences between them than we see between humans and chimpanzees. So we can't know why human beings are a little bit more efficient than we might expect for walking. And there's not necessarily a reason to suppose they have specific derived characteristics that have caused this. Okay. Well, look, being an efficient mover should help with endurance. But imagine you have a car that's rather inefficiently uses its petrol, but it has a very big tank. You'd still be able to drive a long way before you had to stop, because you'd go a long way before you used up all the petrol in the large tank. Are human beings, therefore, are they high endurance athletes? Perhaps not because they're efficient, but because they're able to produce a lot of power for a long period of time until they fatigue. Well, this plot here shows for elite athletes how far they can run for a given speed before they have to slow down. And of course, as you would expect, the faster we run, the less time we can run at that speed for. Interestingly, there's a kind of a split in the data here. Beyond between 5 and 6 meters per second, if we try to run even faster, the rate that our endurance drops away is even quicker. That's associated with, even for elite athletes, at between 5 and 6 meters per second, there's quite a large anaerobic component to their energy production. That's about the speed we'll see the fastest men and women running the marathon tomorrow. Anyway, so that's the relationship between speed and endurance for human beings. For our chimpanzee cousins, they're all the way down here. So even at very low speeds, chimpanzees just can't do it for very long. Let's say 2 meters per second, they're managing maybe 10 minutes before they're worn out. Whereas for fit and healthy human beings, we can do this almost indefinitely. So at least compared to chimpanzees, we're high endurance athletes as a species. Why might this be? Well, it's down to muscle. And human beings have a lot more muscle in their hind limbs, or as we call them, our legs, than do chimpanzees. We have about a quarter of our body's mass, on average, is leg muscle mass, so a considerable loading towards our locomotor limbs. Moreover, the type of muscle is quite different to the chimpanzees. We have 2 to 3 times more slow twitch type 1 muscle fibers than do chimpanzees. These are fatigue resistant, high mitochondrial density. And so we have a propensity towards endurance movement. However, if we compare our physiology more broadly beyond chimpanzees to other mammals, we don't look quite so impressive. So if we take, for example, heart size, so this is heart size relative to our body mass, or if you like here, heart size as a percentage of our body mass. For a relatively untrained, regular human being, our heart is about 0.6% of our overall body mass. In the athletes running towards the front of the race tomorrow, it's more like 0.8%, so their hearts are somewhat bigger. But in many, for example, species of horses or breeds of horses, and many breeds of dogs, they have substantially larger hearts for their body mass than do human beings. Some cetaceans, that's whales and dolphins, also have very large hearts for their body size, but that's another story. If we take elite human runners and compare them to the most elite of horses and the most elite of dogs, we rather pale in comparison. You may be able to make out, if you're towards the front there, heart mass in elite horses can be 2% of body mass, and close to that in horses. And hematocrit levels, so broadly speaking, the percentage of our blood that is made up of red blood corpuscles, is something like 50% greater in those elite horses and dogs than it is in human beings. So all in all, their VO2 max, which of course is I think a lot of you will know is a very good predictor of endurance and of power output capacity, is far greater, more than double, in the very best horses and dogs, for example, than in human beings. Let me give you an example of how this plays out. This is the Marathon des Sables, the Marathon of the Sands. 250 kilometers are covered by the competitors over 7 days. Now, while most of the competitors, as I understand it, in this particular event are amateurs, they train for at least many months before the event. And they're often starting from quite a high fitness base anyway. About a fifth of the participants drop out. So actually most do make it round, which I think is pretty impressive. In 2019, Cactus the dog, who lived locally to the event, decided he was going to join in with the entirety of the race, following round the participants through all the 250 kilometers. He ended up finishing in 52nd place and got a medal, rightly so, for his efforts. Observations on site tell me that he did no stretching out before any of the days running, nor did he stretch down at the end of each day. And eyewitness accounts indicate he took on no isotonic drinks during the event. In fact, I suspect he was fairly blissfully unaware of the immense achievement that he was a part of. Why was he able to do that? By the way, he's a pretty small individual, weighing just a few kilograms, short legs, etc. Because as a dog, he has a tremendous cardiovascular system that humans can only dream of, a large heart for his size, and a fantastic VO2 max. And so, in comparison to some species, and a number of ungulate species, ungulates being, horses, deer, cows, goats, that sort of thing, human beings often look fairly feeble, VO2 max wise. Here's a plot of VO2 max against mitochondrial volume. I'm just more interested in showing that the VO2 max comparison here. We fare fairly poorly compared to many ungulate species. But hang on a minute. Why is it then that there is much documented evidence across multiple continents and multiple populations of human beings employing a strategy to hunt down large ungulate prey that involves what's called persistence hunting, which is an endurance-based endeavour running down large prey to exhaustion, upon which point they can be easily dispatched. Given our low VO2 maxes, our low endurance relative to a lot of ungulate species, how on earth can it be possible to achieve such a feat? Well, I'm going to hand over now to David Attenborough for 2 minutes to pick up the story.
They hunt in silence. The hand sign indicates that one of them has found the track of a group of kudu. These are the San people of the Kalahari Desert, the last tribe on earth to use what some believe is the most ancient hunting technique of all, the persistence hunt. They run down their prey. The animals have taken fright. They will concentrate on the bull. He will be carrying a heavy set of horns and therefore will tire more quickly. To do that, they must separate him from the herd so that his tracks won't be confused by those of others. The sun is directly overhead, and the men sense a change in the kudu's pace. He's slowing. He must be relentless. It's now a test of endurance. Who will collapse first, the man or the animal? A man sweats from glands all over his body and so cools himself. A kudu sweats much less and has to find shade if it's to cool down. He deduces the direction in which it must have fled. It's close by. The chase has lasted 8 hours. Hunter and hunted are both at the end of their strength. Neither can go on much longer. Then the kudu collapses from sheer exhaustion.
So, human beings have a remarkable capacity, I think, to use their relatively good endurance levels in combination with very large brains that enable them to work out how, if they can get a number of factors of the environment to align in their favour, they can achieve the apparently otherwise impossible of running down beasts that are cardiovascularly far superior to them. They use a number of tactics, including working as a team, attempting to predict where the animal they focused on will go, run in a straight line to shorten the distance, pick an animal, as was explained in the video, that perhaps has a disadvantage, appears weak, or in this case a male with large horns that it needs to carry. But crucially, also, they choose the heat of the middle of the day, maximum heat, to undertake persistence hunting, because human beings seem to have an advantage when it comes to dealing with high temperatures. We know, even if sometimes we don't like to admit it personally, that we sweat an awful lot, and most other species don't. So again, is it possible to empirically test whether human beings are better than other animals at endurance running in the heat? Well, a colleague of mine, Caleb Bryce, and I tried this tangentially a few years ago. At the time there were 5, I don't know if there are more now, man versus horse races around the world. So these are endurance races where in fact not just human beings but also horses take part. We were able to collect data, ask for the data, for the results for 3 of these races, the original man versus horse race in Wales and the 2 events at the time in the United States. And what we did was very simple. We looked at the fastest times run each year by the humans and by the horses, and we plotted those times, and therefore, the speeds that were run, against the ambient temperature of the race that day. And here are the results. So for these 3 races, we see the plot of race speed of the horses in grey and the humans in red against the temperature of the race that year. The most obvious thing to note is that the horses run faster than the humans, as you would expect, based on what we know. Grey is above red. But also, you might notice that in each case, as temperature of the race, the ambient temperature on the day of the race increases, the gap in speed between man and horse decreases, suggesting that heat is less deleterious to the running capacity of human beings than it is to horses. In 2022, in the Welsh man versus horse race, the aptly named Ricky Lightfoot made the news because he was the overall winner of the race. Unusually, a person rather than a horse won that year. Here's the data again for Wales, and I looked up the race temperature for Wales that year, a relatively cool event as you would imagine, but nonetheless it was on the higher end of temperatures at 17 degrees, about the temperature that you would expect based on the data that we have that man matches beast. On this occasion, Ricky was able to take advantage of that and his own athletic excellence, no doubt, to win the race. So our ability to sweat brings us kind of back into the game, if you like, as maybe a front runner when it comes to endurance running. Our water turnover rates are very high in the heat, particularly when we're exercising. Perhaps that is why then we so much like the sound of fresh running water, if we can hear it. Oh, did we get to hear the water? You don't get to hear the water, the delicious running water, but you know what I mean. Maybe the reason we find it so attractive is because we're so needy of it, particularly when we're out and about foraging. Okay, so in summary, humans are good at and seem designed for running over distance. This isn't explained, though, by our bipedality. I don't want you to go away from this thinking we're bipedal and that makes us good runners. It could be the case, but there isn't evidence for it. Lots of other mammals are good distance runners too, and in fact some are clearly better than humans. However, humans excel at running in the heat, at least in part because of our capacity to sweat profusely. But that doesn't mean we need to drink a huge amount during a typical marathon just because we're sweaty human beings. As we know, I think now, it is easy to overhydrate, so don't take away lots of sweat means needing to take in lots and lots of fluids. Anyway, the takeaway message is, given that on Sunday it's looking like it's going to be a fairly hot London Marathon, as I was learning at dinner last night, in many parts of the marathon, because of the nature of the environment that we're running through, you're running through It'll be hotter than even 19 degrees, so it's going to be a hot marathon tomorrow. If any of you are competing tomorrow, go out there knowing that you can run faster than a horse. Thank you.
I think we've got time for one question for Lewis before we move on. Anyone? Yes, please, yeah.
Do you think the difference in temperature generated when running and walking has a difference in the efficiency? I don't know if I've explained that very well. So, you know, at the start you mentioned that walking is more efficient than running. So we generate more heat when we run. Do you think that has an impact on that, or do you think it's biomechanics?
Yes, that's a good question. You're right. Our power output's going to be a lot higher when we're running. First of all, because we're moving faster, and secondly, because it's a less efficient gait, actually. And so we're going to generate more heat. And I think that raises an interesting point that hadn't occurred to me before, that when we're comparing these different species, we're not taking into account temperature. And different species may be set up to prefer different temperatures to run at. So maybe we need to test human beings and other species at a variety of temperatures to get a better understanding of who's really most efficient under what circumstances.
Excellent. All right, thank you very much, Lewis. Wonderful stuff.